Hey, it's Drybear. The Final Fantasy XIV Dawntrail developer broadcast, otherwise known as the live letter, has concluded, and we have basically all of the job changes that are coming in the new expansion out in just like 2 months or so. So today I'm going to walk through all of the changes, show off all the job action trailers, we'll go through all the big stuff, just in case you missed the broadcast. But since I know people are frothing at the mouth for the new jobs, in order we're going to go through the new jobs and all of their actions and how their combat works and how the rotation works. Then we'll go through the different roles and jobs that exist in the game and the major changes and reworks that are going into them. But before we do that, the one change that I liked the most out of all of the general changes that weren't related to jobs in the live letter relates to the Fantasia item. See, in Dawntrail, we're getting a major graphical overhaul for the game to make it look a lot better, and because of this, they're giving every player in the game a free Fantasia item, which allows you to change the appearance of your character. Which is great because if you don't like the way your character looks under the new graphical system, you'll be able to change to a new race or a new gender or new appearance to fit that new style. However, today with the new live letter, they mentioned they're making a crazy change to Fantasia, and that when you finalize your Fantasia, an in-game timer starts for 60 minutes that allows you to go back to character creation and still make further edits to your character until you've spent 60 minutes in-game on that character. Which means when you use a Fantasia and everything looks great in character selection, you'll be able to go into game and see your character running around in the game world. You can try on all your glamours and see if everything looks the way you thought it would, and if you don't like it, you have 60 minutes to go back to character creation and make edits, and those edits are unlimited until the timer is up. Now let's jump into the job changes, which is probably the reason why you're here. 2 new jobs are joining the roster for Dawntrail Final Fantasy XIV, the Viper and the Pictomancer. This is the first time we've received 2 DPS jobs in one major update. And I gotta tell you, I went into this broadcast thinking that Pictomancer was never gonna be played for me. I'd maybe get it to max level and that's it, but after the broadcast today, I am very impressed. The Viper is a fast-paced melee job, and they went through all the different ins and workings of the cooldowns and properties of this job. I thought it was gonna be a stance swapper, but it's actually more of a trance, kind of like Reaper. So you actually spend your time in the dual blade form, which is having a blade in each hand separately, and you'll use your abilities to build up to a trance state, which is your double bladed form. And yes, I wish they would use a different moniker than the like dual blade and double blade to me are not different enough to be 2 different states of being. I wish they would rename them like twin blade or something, but you would build up with dual blade and then you'd enter into this trance state, which is double blade, which is crazy spamming melee attacks all over the place, and it's pretty fast paced. Now they mentioned that the total number of actions are similar to other jobs, but they designed it so that fewer actions are needed to be put on the action bar, and in the footage they gave us, it is pretty obvious that a lot of these actions are changing dynamically based on the order and sequence that you're in the combo. The overall impression I got from Viper in this showcase was that it seemed like it was a much faster paced samurai overall, because you have ways to go in and out of trances and use your buffs in very simple, straightforward methods. And after watching a bunch of the action here, you can actually see that it's not as spammy as it might seem. It doesn't, at first it looked like it was going to be like an MS latency nightmare, but it actually is just a lot of really fast-paced animations and VFX that are playing on screen, but the button presses aren't as spammy as it may look, but it does seem like it feels really good and snappy to play. And that's Viper. It's actually pretty easy to understand from an outside perspective, very easy to explain. It seems like it's more of a feel-good kind of visceral kind of job to play. However, we've got a lot to talk about at Pictomancer because there's a lot of inner workings and mechanics that all play together to make the class work. The Pictomancer is a caster being added to the roster. They play from ranged and they cast spells. But they got elements of like Ninja or Astrologian that have this prep time out of combat and in combat to slot things in and then use them in different combinations. And at first I thought we were going to have like a remake of the original Summoner job with tons of different buttons and sequences and all that, but it's actually pretty straightforward, but we have to understand the mechanics that go into the job before we get to that point. So first things first, you'll see these canvases as part of your UI frame. There are 3 different canvases that you have, and these are actually specific categories for the drawings that you're going to be making. On the very left-hand side, you have the creature category, in the middle is the weapon category, and on the right side is the landscape category, and these are the types of paintings that you'll be making. You have a button for each of these categories that will draw draw a motif is what it's called, that will slot that into the canvas. However, this is just a drawing and doesn't do anything for you right away. Once you have drawn the motif and it's locked into the canvas, you can then render that motif into real life to create an ability out of it. The simplest of these is going to be the landscape category, and these are just your party buffs. You will render a landscape onto your canvas, and then you'll draw the motif onto your canvas and then render that motif into real life and give a big buff to everyone around you. And I did mention that you'll have this persistent area with buffs in it. It will have an instant application of several buffs to people outside of this radius as well, and generally has a long cooldown. So this is kind of your synergy party-wide or alliance-wide buffing that comes from the Pictomancer. In the middle category is the weapon, and it seems like as of the newest expansion of the release of Pictomancer, there is only one specific motif that you'll get from this, which is going to be your hammer motif. So when you activate the motif button, you will draw the hammer motif and it'll lock into your canvas, and you'll have 2 charges for this. When you render the hammer motif into being, it activates a special ability for your hammer from your weapon motif category that allows you to do this hit combo with the hammer itself, which is pretty fast and very spammable. It does have a longer cooldown, but you'll be able to draw the hammer, render it into reality, and then do this combo of melee that is kind of like your very heavy damage output window. So if you get a nice chance to deal some burst damage, you'll throw out the hammer. You probably will have this loaded into your motif canvas and just have it ready to go for when you need it next. But the most complicated of this is going to be the creature category, which is the left canvas of your motifs. See, unlike the landscape category where you really just draw a single landscape, render it, and buff everybody, or like the weapon category where you draw the motif of the hammer, render it, and you have a single skill that you can use, the creature category goes through a several step tiered rotation and is kind of be like the bread and butter of your gameplay. When your creature canvas is empty, you will draw a motif of a creature, which goes through a set sequence. It will start out with something like a pon-pon, and then you will draw this into your canvas, render it to create a special spell, which will have pon-pon raining from the sky and dealing damage. Once you're done rendering, the canvas will be empty and your motif button will come active again, and it will go through the next cycle, which will pop up with wings. When you draw the wings and then render that into being, it becomes more of like an arrow wind spell, and once you've done 2 renders in a row, it will unlock a creature spell that can be used, and it looks like it's instant cast. Then once you've completed that creature spell, it resets back to the beginning. You'll draw the next motif, which is going to be a picture of claws. You'll then render this into a being to create an ability. You'll do the claws attack, and then you'll do the same thing for the fangs. And once you've completed the second rotation of doing motif into rendering, you'll unlock the second super attack on cooldown, which will do this cool effect. So creature is constantly rotating between these 2 sets of 2 motifs that you will use the motif and then render it and then be able to unlock an ability and go through that rotation. And it's important to note that when you're rendering a motif, it usually is instant cast, but when you're drawing the motif, when you're drawing it onto your canvas, if you're in combat, it has a pretty sizable cast time, and when you're out of combat, it has no cast time at all. So you can kind of pre-prep your motifs before you go into combat for what you're looking for, and then in combat, you'll have to draw those onto your canvas and then use them as they become available. Now, as you go through the process of drawing the motifs and rendering them and going through the different categories, you'll start filling up your 2 different gauges. You have an ether hue gauge, which is going to be your rainbow charge, this little bar that fills up. And when you get to a certain certain thresholds like 50 charge or 100 charge, you can use things like subtractive palette, which changes your ether hue and gives you different effects. And while you're doing your rotation, you also fill up your palette gauge with these little orbs on the side of the meter. And when you have these, you can use these to instantly cast things to speed up your process or allow you to move throughout the fight. And one of the coolest aspects of the Pictomancer showcase was this omnidirectional dash, this like Splatoon slide that they have that has a crazy short cooldown. So you'll be drawing and rendering and then combining together and doing things between using weapons or monster attacks or super attacks or combining things together to summon monsters, and then you'll be able to slide around the fight in between these to create a really unique caster experience. And honestly, I went into this broadcast thinking I was going to main Viper for the expansion, and after the broadcast, I'm thinking I might actually want to be playing Pictomancer instead. Moving on to the tank changes. For global, all tanks are getting this change, and this is going to be a change that you're going to see throughout these notes here, but the Rampart and Job exclusive 30% damage reduction abilities will be upgraded when you move into the between 90 and level 100, and reprisal duration is being increased to 15 seconds in the 90s, like 90 to 100 range as well. And what concerns me about this is you're going to see this on all of the roles. A lot of these are getting longer and stronger, which tells me that we're going to start running into some strong encounters throughout the expansion. Paladin didn't change too much with this expansion. The second and third atonement have been changed to be brand new actions with their own individual animations. So overall, your second and third atonement in that sequence is going to look cooler and more visually appealing, but should be functioning just the same. They're adding a new action that can be executed after Blade of Valor, and they're also making it so Goring Blade requires fight or flight to be active in order to be used. Warrior is getting 2 new actions, one that can be executed after 3 Fell Cleaves or 3 decimates before people get mad, and it can only be activated while Inner Release is active. There's also new action that can be executed after Primal Rend, so it seems like in general your experience as Warrior isn't going to be changing too much. You just have some new options available that will extend some of your combos, and I think that's kind of the right way to go, as I like the feeling of Warrior in its current state. Dark Knight is getting a bit of a controversial change. They're making it so that when Blood Weapon will be upgraded into the fact that when you use Blood Weapon and Delirium will be combined together into one. The effects of Blood Weapon will be added to Delirium. And I think some people really have a pride factor around the opener for Dark Knight and how many buttons and how difficult it is. But realistically, Delirium and Blood Weapon are almost always used together anyways. So this makes it 1 button instead of 2, which simplifies the process of going through that. I have my own thoughts on the simplification of Final Fantasy XIV, but at least that is there. Their goal is to reduce the number of buttons pressed at once, and realistically those 2 abilities are kind of tied together. There's also going to be a new action that is executed after you execute Living Shadow. That again, have too many details about this. People speculate that you might be able to blow up your Living Shadow. It likely will be related to damage, but we don't know until they give it to us up straight. And by the way, they have mentioned that they are looking at more quality of life and like just general improvements for the game in 7.0 for Dawntrail, but they're also looking at more major reworks and class identity or job specificity, like uniqueness of jobs, going into 8.0 for the next expansion. So this is laying the groundwork for that, but they did mention that they do want to look at more in-depth changes for Dark Knight and some other jobs going into the next X-Pack. Gunbreaker is getting a new action executed after Fated Circle via continuation, and another 3-step combo executed after Bloodfest, and luckily this combo does not have a cartridge cost. So while we're not getting a new meter or a new gauge for Gunbreaker, you're not even getting any more cartridges. It looks like you'll be having more actions that you can work into your rotation that won't be as costly as some of your other ones. So if you wanted to have more 3-step combos with your 3-step combos on Gunbreaker, then it seems like Dawntrail is where you should be. Moving on to the melee changes, this is going to be the same for other physical damage dealers as well, but second wind healing is increased in the 90s level range, and the feint duration is increased to 15 seconds, which is very similar to what we saw with the global changes for the tanks. For Dragoon, and I'm not personally happy with this change in general, so let me know what your thoughts are on it down below, but the 5th hit in the combo for Dragoon, the 2 5-hit combos, is now going to be combined into one ability, and this ability is no longer directional. So Fang and Claw or Wheeling Thrust will now change to Drake's Bane, and the input stays the same. It'll dynamically update for you, and this Drake's Bane attack doesn't have any directional. Now, I get some people don't like directional. It's also probably more problematic on console, where moving and repositioning constantly with the analog stick is a little bit more cumbersome than it is with mouse and keyboard on PC. But personally for me, they've been on this trend of simplifying the game over and over and over throughout all the X-Packs, and I think this is one of the things that I liked about Dragoon personally, and I personally don't have any issue with directional, so this directional going away, even though Dragoon had only like 1 or 2 left over the changes over the last few years we've had. It was kind of disappointing to me, but you let me know what your thoughts are. There's some quality of life changes for Dragoon as well. Life of the Dragon is available without needing Dragon Gauge. This one's super nice because it means that you can start the combat with it and allows you to line up with your other party members in this bonus window without having to start combat, build Gauge, and then use Life of the Dragon, which is pretty cool. They also mentioned that actions will be removed or adjusted to lower the number of inputs during the burst damage phase, and having the your Fang and Claw wielding thrust replaced by a single non-directional ability kind of goes along with that, I guess. Reaper has some insane new visual effects. In fact, these are probably my favorite visual effects of the broadcast that they had in general. Reaper effects look so crazy good now. They're also changing Plentiful Harvest effect so that will allow execution of Enshroud rather than giving you Shroud Gauge. And several jobs in the new expansion got this so that you don't get the resource wastage of popping up and like losing out on resource because you used it too close to max. You don't get the full value out of it. So instead of giving you meter, it just allows you to execute Enshroud instead, which means that you don't have to worry about wasting that meter or lining that up properly. On top of that, Reaper's getting 1 new ability, 1 new action that's executed while you're enshrouded, and it's mixed in here and it looks pretty cool. Ninja is getting a new gauge, and they're also changing Huton's effect to be a trait that is always active. So you'll gain this new trait that will always be active for the buff of Huton that exists now, and you also get a brand new Huton that will be changed to an AoE attack when you combine it together and activate it, which grants the effect of Hidden. So again, pretty simple like streamlining for Ninja. The new gauge kind of shows off that part of the character, but they didn't really go into many specifics of the other changes for Ninja. It seems like it's mostly going to be a lot more streamlined and more smooth. It's a new expansion, which means that we need a new Monk rework as well. Monk now has another visual gauge that you can monitor your activities with as well, and they're getting another major rework for their gameplay, which is pretty simple and probably feels good, but might be an oversimplification. Again, Monk, I like the complicated classes in the game, and so having characters like Monk or like the old Summoner being reworked and simplified to me is not something that I'm super fan of, but I'll play it and see if it actually is as bad as it seems in my head. See, they're changing it from the old style Monk, at least in Endwalker, where your combo mechanics, when you step through your different combos, are going around maintaining your own personal buff and maintaining the dot on the target. They're removing that so that instead, when you go through the proper order of your skills and stances for Monk, it will just increase the next action's potency, which kind of removes that planning around making sure you're refreshing the dot on the right window and getting your buff and moving between the different cycles properly. Instead, it's just as long as you do your proper order and click on the shiny buttons, you'll be able to increase the potency of your next action, which to me seems like an oversimplification of the job, although it was one of the harder jobs to play in the game in Endwalker. We'll have to see how that actually plays out. They did also mention that you can now stack up to 10 chakra while Brotherhood is active to prevent chakra overflow, which again is a nice streamlined effect. For Samurai, they're simplifying the recast management. I'm going to mess these up so bad, but Tsubame Geishi will be changed to executable after Meikyo Shisui. They're also upgrading Hakaze, Tenkagoken, and Midare Setsu Geka into brand new actions, and the new Super Midare looks amazing. It looks so cool. And they're also planning to add a new action to lower the recast time of Hitsatsu, so overall I think it's going to be a lot smoother for Samurai. Nothing major here, but you get some new visual effects, some new treatments, and some smoother gameplay to transition between your full rotation. Moving on to our 3 physical ranged DPS jobs. In global, just like with the melee, Second Wind's healing effect is going to be increased in level ranges 90 to 100, and the damage reduction of job exclusive defensive abilities will be increased to 15% in the 90 to 100 range. For Machinist, it seems like we're getting new buzzsaws or more buzzsaws based on the actions trailer, but I could also just be imagining things. They didn't mention this specifically, but at least from what I saw in the trailer, it does seem to be the case. And just like with Reaper, they're changing Barrel Stabilizer so that it no longer gives heat gauge, but instead will just allow you to execute Hypercharge without wasting any extra gauge, which I think is a nice change. And to make things even more fun, in level 90 to 100 for the new expansion, you'll gain a new trait that allows you to accumulate charges of drill. So you get a bunch of buzzsaws, flamethrowers, and now you'll get multiple charges of drill, which will make it feel real nice. For Dancer, they're getting 2 new actions. The first one is executed after Flourish, which sounds kind of cool. I'd have to play it to see how it actually feels, but it does sound really awesome. And the second action consumes Esprit, and it's executed after technical finish. And so I haven't played my Dancer like very recently, at least like in the last few months or year. I kind of left my Dancer where he was, but in general, it seems like this is going to be kind of a nice step. So any Dancer mains out there, let me know what you think about these 2 new actions being added to the mix. For Bard, we're finally getting some major improvements. There's been like 1 or 2 things for Bard over the history of Final Fantasy XIV that have been long requested, and we're finally getting them. So Bard mains, Bard stonks are rising in Dawntrail. Firstly, Mage's Ballad, Army's Paean, and Wanderer's Minuet, your three song spells when you enter into your song stance. These will now be changed into buffing actions that don't attack enemies, which means that you can maintain your rotation when there are no enemies around. So when you see that monk running by that's constantly maintaining their process and doing their fist pumping, you can now join that fist pumping party, because all of your 3 song spells or your song stances can be activated even without a target nearby, which means if your tank isn't pulling constantly, you don't have to rely on that to be able to keep up your status. And this is something that's been requested for the Bard community for a very long time. On top of that, Pitch Perfect will be changed into an AoE attack, which means that it's going to be a little bit more useful in those big wall-to-wall pulls, or when you get a bunch of adds in a big boss fight, you'll be able to use Pitch Perfect interchangeably, whether it's a single target or a big group of enemies, which is super cool. They're also changing it so your ready state, your ready flag that you have, your Shadow Bite ready and your AoE ready, both of those are going to be combined into one single. They'll be merged together, which I think is a nice clean update for them as well. For caster changes, globally, Swift Cast Recast will be reduced to 40 seconds in the 90 to 100 range, which does open up some interesting rotation options for casters in general. And they're also making it so Addle's duration will be increased to 15 seconds between 90 to 100 in the new content, which is pretty cool. Moving to Red Mage, they now have an additional 4 combo, it seems, from the animations here. And they're also getting some adjustments to streamline the experience of playing Red Mage. Just like Reaper and Machinist, when you activate Manification, it will no longer increase your black mana and white mana, but instead will allow you to execute enchanted swordplay abilities without wasting your meters. You can just manage your meters separately, pop Manification, and use your enchanted swordplay without having to worry about how much mana you have and if you're going to waste any. The other change is that the AoE Enchanted Swordplay combo, beginning with Enchanted Moulinet, will now consume exactly 50 black and white mana, similar to the single target version. I don't know why these were different for the longest time, but now finally they will be identical. So whether you're going to do your AoE Enchanted Swordplay or single target Enchanted Swordplay, it's going to cost the same amount of mana regardless. Black Mage actually has some interesting changes going on here. There will be a new gauge to represent some of the new combinations you're going to have available, but for gameplay wise, rotation wise, they've made some adjustments to make the experience a lot better. And the first one is a big one: restoring MP upon landing ice spells while Umbral Ice is active is going to be instant rather than passively over time. So rather than generating your MP and waiting for it to tick all the way through, when you land an ice spell while Umbral Ice is active, you'll just instantly get your MP back, which I think makes that experience infinitely better. And I always hated the fact that you passively get that MP in that case, which means you have to kind of line up these ticks, and when it's part of playing Black Mage and it's part of the skill, but I think it's something that's a little antiquated, and it feels like it's just better to be able to plan around getting that mana when you need it so you can use it right away. There's also a new action being added to Black Mage that allows you to reposition your ley line to where you're currently standing. So with this new action, Black Mage is casters can't always make the excuse that they couldn't get out of the mechanic because their ley line was there. It looks like, as far as we can tell, you'll be able to place the ley line, move to a new spot, relocate the ley line to where you are now, and then keep using it. And it seems like it's only going to be a one-time use per ley line. So you can put ley line down and you can move it once, but then that's going to be it until you get your next ley line as part of your rotation. But this gives you a lot more options to finish a burst window in a certain spot, and if you have to move for mechanics, you can jump to a party mate or run to a party mate, place down your ley line again, like move it to your new spot, and then continue your rotation there without having to perfectly place your ley line for the entire duration of it or risk wasting that bonus that you get. Lastly, for the casters is Summoner, and we got debated because the job action trailer that they had for Summoner, it looked like it was more of an Odin flourish coming off of the new meter. It looked very Odin-like, so I was thinking that we're going to get maybe a new Odin, either as like the super summon or the core 3 summon rotation for that, but it ended up being not the case. So what we're getting for Summoner is that you're now going to get another super summon that will sit basically in between regular Bahamut and Phoenix. So you're basically going to go through this rotation of doing the new summon into Bahamut, into the new summon, into Phoenix, and that rotation will complete. And the new summon is what I thought at first was going to be called Bahamut Zero, because that's what it looks like to me, but instead they're calling it Solar Bahamut. We already had a Lunar Bahamut that we fought in one of the dungeons, but this is the Solar Bahamut, and it's akin to Bahamut and Phoenix. So your general rotation is going to be going through your core base with the 3 different elements, and then as you go into your super summons, you'll start with Solar Bahamut, then go into Bahamut, then Solar Bahamut, and then Phoenix. So it just gives you an extra super summon. It's essentially just Bahamut, but with more Neo Zero vibes looking to it, and they call it Solar Bahamut, but it does give it a little bit more rotational depth to the summoner class or summoner job, which, you know, was already pretty straightforward in general. They also confirmed that they're going to be keeping res as part of the summoner kit throughout the expansion, and they kind of alluded to the fact that they want to remove DPS resurrections going into the next expansion with 8.0, but they didn't give any firm details on this. Additionally, there's going to be a new action added to summoner that is executed after Searing Light, which I don't think changes too much, but it's just a nice flavor that should just make summoner feel brand new in the new expansion. Lastly, let's talk about the healer changes. The global change we talked about for casters, where swift cast recast time will be reduced to 40 seconds in the 90s level range, is the same for healers. And this, just like with the damage rotations on the casters, I think is going to be a nice feel good for healers. You can use that swift cast for a big heal if you need it. Like if you're a job that doesn't have those on-demand burst heals, having swift cast more available is going to be nice. Or you can use it to just mix up your rotation, or maybe even do damage if you really want to. Starting with Astrologian, there's another major rework for Astrologian, and someone who loved, I actually was an Astrologian maid in Shadowbringers, but after the changes that we saw in Endwalker, I haven't really played healers in a while just because I was so disappointed with how they did the card system. So we're getting another new card system for Astrologian in Dawntrail. We are now back to card slots. You will have 4 card slots that you will be able to fill up instantly on a 60-second rotation, which means that the card system is no longer random. You will get a fixed set of 4 cards on a 2-set rotation that will just go back and forth between the 2, and instead you will simultaneously draw these cards, and these cards will fit into very specific categories. You will get 1 offensive card, 1 defensive card, 1 curative card, and then your king card, or your crown card, basically. So the 8 total types of cards that we have now at the end of Endwalker are being split into 2 groups of 4. So you have your 6 types plus your Lord and Lady of Crowns. Now that's going to be split into 2 groups. So you'll have an offensive card, a defensive card, a curative card, and then the crown. And then when you use that ability again, you'll get the next set, and it'll just keep rotating between a fixed set of 4 cards, which means the randomness is completely gone. It also means that since you're swapping between 2 sets of cards, they're effectively doing your sign rotation anyways, which means that Astrodyne will be removed with the discontinuation of the Astro signs. There's no Astro signs, there's no card randomness. You just swap between these 2 sets of cards, and you get to choose which cards you use and when, and the focus is rather around like in the moment reacting to the card that you get and using it properly. It's now around using your card properly in the right moment if it presents itself, but you're going to have your cards on deck pretty much all the time. which at least for me is kind of hard to imagine because it's so different than the way Astrologian has been played that I would really just have to play it over a bunch of hours to really get the sense of, is this actual improvement or not? But it's certainly different. So I'm guessing you'll just pull this 60-second draw button, which will give you 4 cards. You'll be able to use these cards throughout the next minute of time while you're waiting for it to come back, and using each one in the right moment is going to give you the right value that you have from it, and you're not going to have to constantly look at your card deck to see which ones you've stored, which ones you're going to draw, and what you're going to get next, and what it should be used for. It's less impromptu decision making and more around using your planning and awareness to use the right card for the maximum impact, and planning when that moment of impact is going to be available to you. They also mentioned that Essential Dignity max stacks are going to increase, which I think is just going to feel better for the Astrologian in general. White Mage isn't changing too much, but there's some nice quality of life in here. The first is they're getting a new action which allows you to move quickly forward. When I first saw this in the trailer, it looked almost like the White Mage was jumping to someone, like a reverse rescue, being able to leap to a party member. But when they described it, they talked about just moving the caster forward. So it's very possible that this is just a forward fixed dash for the White Mage, which is super nice. It just gives you a little bit more mobility, which should add to some flavor for the White Mage playstyle. There's also a new AoE attack, which gets executed up to 3 times after you cast Presence of Mind. So you're going to have a little bit more flexibility if you don't want to just spam Holy over and over and over and over. And hopefully there's enough potency in this new attack to be able to encourage that kind of behavior, because I don't really like seeing Holy spammed over and over. And on top of that, they mentioned increasing the number of stacks for Tetragrammaton as well. For Scholar, we were all wondering if there was going to be a new fairy or some super Selene or some kind of combination, and they hit us with a blindside in that there is now going to be a transformation state for Scholar in Dawntrail, which, at least from what I can tell in the action trailer, does not consume or deactivate your current fairy at all. It is just an angel transformation, and it's called Seraphism. When you activate this transformation state, it changes your appearance to be more angelic and holy-like with wings, and it enhances all of your healing magics while it's active. There's also a new action for Scholars, which is an AoE attack that can be executed after Chain Stratagem, and this one is a damage over time effect, which they also did for Sage, which is super cool. I generally like having AoE dots for healers that have more intense rotations, so having it on Scholar is a little bit more, it makes more sense, at least. So you can have that free time to cast the dot, still have uptime, still have throughput of damage, and then you can switch over to managing your fairies and doing that kind of thing. But you're going to have basically your AoE and your AoE dot, and this AoE attack can be executed after Chain Stratagem. And Scholar will also get a new trait which reduces the recast time for resuscitation. For Sage, Eucrasia will now enhance Dyscrasia 2 into Eucrasian Dyscrasia, which is an AoE attack which deals damage over time. So just like the new attack for the Scholar, Sages will also have a nice AoE attack that applies a damage over time effect. Additionally, a new action for Sage will be added, which is a new party buff, which allows you to activate this for Sage. And when you have it active, every time you cast a spell as the Sage, everyone nearby will get healed. So I think this, combined with the dot, will allow for more flexibility in the rotation, and might even allow you to do some more on the move heals, or it might fill some gaps for the Sage gameplay that should feel pretty nice. And that's all the changes for the live letter that we saw today for Final Fantasy XIV. The expansion is looking really cool, and I think the overall theme or vibe for this expansion is more just quality of life. It almost feels like the beach episode in an anime that we're going to have for the expansion. This is just improving the graphics, improving the gameplay, reworking some old systems, some antiquated things, and making the game feel better. We're still going to have new storylines and new content and new encounters and raids and all of that, but in general, it looks like we're just going to be making the game a lot smoother and prettier in Dawntrail, and they're looking for some major reworks going into the 8.0 expansion, which is going to be in 2 years from now. If you found value in today's video, leave a like down below, leave a comment for the algorithm to help this video get seen by more people, and don't forget to check out my other channels for other content and other stuff and other things.